And we are live. There we are. Like always, before we start, a couple of practical notes while we wait for remaining attendees to come in. On your right-hand side, you'll see two things. First of all, the chat, which is where I hope every one of you will put their questions, answers, remarks, drawings, doodles, whatever, as this is a brain pool we're trying to create. So please share your brain with us by posting your questions in the chat. And as you just saw go live behind the red dot in the poll, we would like to know a little bit about you, to see who we have in the room here today. Well, we're seeing some answers coming in. What we know we have in the room here today is 4 men from Britain and the Netherlands, and this webinar is cast from the former Colonial Institute. So I think we have a lot of colonial experience at the table already. Well, I'll give you 1 more minute to finalize the poll, and let's get going. All right, 25 people in the room. That's good. That's good. Okay. Well, I see a couple of people from food companies come in. We have no farmers, which is not a surprise, but it tells you something, right? It's us talking about and on behalf of farmers. A little bit of colonialism there as well. Can't help it though. We see a lot of non-governmental organizations and a bunch of other. Well, I hope we'll find out later who we are exactly. But this is roughly who we are today in this webinar, the 3rd in a series of Trace talks. And today's subject will be data colonization. A disclaimer, I'm a bit of a game board game geek, and tonight after this this webinar I'll be playing with 2 friends at social distancing this game called Kolonisten van Catan, Colonizers of Catan, and some of you may know it. For those of you who don't, this is a good old resource management game. First you conquer territory, and then you develop villages and start plowing away at the forest to make wood, and mining the mountain to get gold, etc., etc. And the game's objective is to win, and you win by taking stuff from the colonies and having more of it than the others. It's a zero-sum game, which looks a lot like colonialism. If this game would have been made today, I'm sure they would, or should have at least, put data as the most valuable resource of the game, because data is, in today's day and age, the most valuable resource, and therefore it's colonized. What we mean with data colonization is the process by which a central system of power dominates a particular data landscape. And let's go into an example, because I think it clarifies things. Facebook, that's the last thing we'll say about Facebook. It has 250 million Indian users. So in that sense, you could say that India is a data colony of Facebook. And we all know what that could mean. If Facebook collects, owns, and sells that data for the highest bidder. We've seen in the 2016 US election what that can do. In Brexit, what that can do. Basically, it's elections for sale. And that's what happens if you lose control over your data. Facebook collects 5,000 data points on its users and sells them to the highest bidder. In some cases, it's not all bad, but that's what data colonization can be. Now, these 250 million Indian users are presumably predominantly young, urban, slightly educated, in possession of a smartphone. So it's not really the farmer or food worker group, right? The 500 million, to my estimate, of smallholder farmers and food workers in India are probably not totally part of that digitized group yet. They are the colonies to be discovered and colonized. So what we are talking about here is not so much what happens with our data. We are colonized as well. We're talking about what might happen and already is starting to happen with the data of the hundreds of millions of food workers and smallholder farmers around the globe, who in the next 10 years will probably be digitized by some system of power. Whether it's us as Fairfood with Trace, or big Aadhaar systems of the Indian government, right? It's coming, and we, as Fairfood, claim to work on behalf of these farmers and food workers, and therefore need to think about and discuss what the consequences of this data colonization can be. And therefore, we have this webinar. So we need you to help us out in not colonizing the data of the farmers that we're working with. The two basic questions that we'll try to answer today towards that goal is, what's the problem for farmers and food workers of data colonization? Is there a problem? Is there a problem now, or will there be a problem later? And what are solutions or options we have to prevent it? Right? Problem owners, solution owners, roughly. And in order to help us with these two difficult questions, we have speakers. Han Brouwers from Solidaridad, where he works as program manager digital solutions, will represent the problem owner side of this discussion, well, maybe the solution side as well. Whereas on the other side of the room we have Shiv Agarwal, founder of the digital identity solution Earth ID. Really interesting. And Jacob Boersma, a blockchain authority in the Netherlands, and recently started his own Boersma consulting firm. Welcome, guys. Thanks for being here. I hope I've introduced you well. Please take the opportunity when you take the word to elaborate on that if you want. But what I'm hoping for is more or less a free-flowing conversation, and I'll try to work questions from the chat into it to keep it a little bit interactive. All right? Okay, we have a problem and solutions. So, Han, since I've designated you as a problem owner, what is the problem of data colonization for farmers, in your opinion?
Well, thank you, Martin. Let's reframe it a bit. I'm of course, would like to speak on behalf of all those hundreds of millions of farmers and food workers in the whole world, but that would be a bit too arrogant, I think. Now, what we see, Solidaridad is an NGO. We are basically in the field already for over 50 years, and in the field, I mean working in agricultural supply chains with boots and brains on the ground, as we call it, in a lot of developing countries. mainly agricultural supply chains. Now, what we have seen over the years, and basically I would like to, let's say, summarize it in two components. One is the sign of the times. You know, we're talking about privacy, we're talking about data ownership. This is let's say, still quite a Western world kind of discussion, but it is indeed of a sign of the times. You know, probably most of the audience have seen a couple of documentaries on it, like The Social Dilemma, etc. Now, as said, this is a typical Western things. Next to that, we also see, let's say, a kind of fatigue when it comes to sustainability labeling. We see a lot of pressure on companies. Also, again, a sign of the times, whether, you know, this neoliberal ways of working are in the end leading to the successes we all want, and you know, equal shares of value, etc. That is one side of the angle. The other side of the angle is looking in history. I said we have over 50 years of experience in the field, and over time data has been collected. It's not new. You know, originally it went with handwritten notepads, people, you know, handwritingly keeping their farm diaries up to date, etc. Later on Excel, etc. More tools to support. However, now with the upcoming, you know, penetration of mobile devices, IoT issues, or IoT products, etc., we see a huge increase of data to be collected for all kind of purposes. It started, as said, with, for instance, how sustainable are the producers in the field, attached to fair trade, would certify that kind of label. There already data is collected, is traded, etc., because companies are paying for that data, and in the end it ends up in a label. But you know, a lot of new things are now emerging. I already mentioned IoT. So a lot of ground farm level data. And another example is, for instance, the increased demand for carbon related data. Now, all together raise the question, how is this data in the end treated? Who owns this data? Is this data treated ethically, etc.? And then we said, okay, let's start investigating how we can contribute to an alternative data economy. That's how we called it for now, an alternative data economy, which will work for the benefit of the farmers, so for the primary beneficiaries, meaning that, first of all, are there models available, or can we jointly with partners and the whole industry develop models where the ownership of the data will be guaranteed till, let's say, the end in farmers' hands? And secondly, can we develop mechanisms where the value of this data will return to farmers? So those are the two components which are, let's say, at our plate per today. As you perfectly also indicated, Martin, we are here with 4 Western guys, at least we're all based in Western Europe. So this is all based on assumptions. And the next step for us is that, you know, we would like to work together with partners on this dilemma and see what the impact on farm level will be and what in the end farmers actually will do. Because there could be a scenario that say, well, I don't care at all, leave it, and we will see what happens. That's also a scenario. So we are now, let's say, in that part of the of our journey.
Thanks, Han. Indeed, that question of what farmers themselves want and need and know and can do about this is really important. Shiv and Jacob, do you have questions to ask or things to add about this problem side of the issue?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's a very interesting area, right? Because I think I was reading actually this one blog on Stanford University, and then I think the topic at hand with respect to data colonization, I was reading this line. So it says that data colonization might be free of violence, but there is the symbolic violence that lies at the core of how data colonization categorizes and orders everyday life. Data colonization is introducing a social order that relies on a lot of force and pressure. So what that means is basically that I think in earlier days, I think as you were explaining, Martin, right, that earlier colonization was about other resources with respect to oil, with respect to spices, and so many other things. But now it's about data, and then I think there's so many different industries. So you explained about social media, but when you also look at as Han mentioned, right, so telecom sector, which has basically access to all our data with respect to what we do, where we sleep, what we eat, and where we travel, and everything, right? So they know what we discuss with whom, and this is where they know us, everything about us in and out, right? And similarly, when we look at smart devices, because slowly and steadily we are using more smart devices in our lives, like it could be Alexa, it could be Siri. They are listening to everything, right? And then the question is, what is happening with that data that they're capturing? And lastly, I think if you look at from a government point of view, or from a public sector point of view, we can look at China's social scoring, right, where the data is basically the public data is kind of being used against them in terms of who get access to what services and at what level. So in that sense, data is actually a weapon, and then but in basically in wrong hands it can be misused, right? And this is where I think the key question which Han also raised are basically with respect to the data ownership, the privacy, and the consent, right? Because I think the biggest question is, because who is generating this data, who's capturing this data, and who's owning this data, and then how this data is being monetized, how is this data being used, right? Because usually I think when we look at the digital ecosystem, it's about providing benefits to human lives, right? But I think the question is whether we are achieving that or not. And then specifically when we look at the agriculture sector or farmers, right? As of today, I think that is one sector. I think as Han mentioned, in Western world, maybe I think the life is different with respect to the farmers. But when we look at the eastern side, when you talk about Indian farmers or Asian farmers, I think they don't necessarily have that strong access to technology, and that is where I think we have this opportunity to kind of provide the technology. But then the question is, the technology that we are providing, whether that is going to further colonize them or not, right? So I think these are some of the questions which we should discuss in this discussion.
That last one is important indeed, because the technology is available, but in my opinion, it's more about the processes and re-engineering the whole supply chain when it comes to the data journey. But indeed, technology is available. Let's take that as a starting point to discuss at least re-engineering a part of those models as they currently exist.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think it's very important what Shiv also mentioned around the value, or both of you, I think, mentioned about the value of data, because the perceived value of data will also very much differ between the different parties in the supply chain, and that alone will lead to this data colonization becoming a problem. If you provide these farmers with the means to provide that data, but they are not aware that is data which is actually very valuable, they will not realize that value. Somebody else will be realizing the value of that data. And that is exactly, I think, the key of the problem.
I like how we're what I started to pitch as a problem is now value and benefit and advantage. So I think we're quite positive here. Do we know what the value is of a person's data?
So I think in today's world, right, I think data is that new asset, right, which the big enterprises are running after, right? Because if you think about this, we are not paying anything to use Facebook, we are not paying anything to Google to use anything, right? So in that sense, we are getting some free services, but the question is, are they free, right? Because obviously, I think we are providing our data to these organizations who are then monetizing it further, right? And when we categorize the data, right, there are two types of data. One is your personal data, personal identity data, and the second thing is your transactional data, right? Now, what happens is, like, when we look at these two buckets of data, the personal data is utilized by a lot of service providers to basically verify your identity and then provide access you to services, right? So in that sense, there are certain organizations which monetize this data to basically kind of do those verification and onboarding processes. So this is where that data is being monetized. But then also this data is also being monetized with respect to marketing sector, right? Where different multinational organizations are buying this data off the hands from Facebook, Google, and so many other data collectors, so that they can push their services, their products onto us. And I think again, it's very, very interesting that we don't realize that we are being conditioned, right, in terms of how we share our data. Because if you think about this, there are no boundaries with respect to what data we are sharing, right? We have seen people sharing everything about their lives, the credit cards, the bank information on social platform. And then this data is basically, so we are kind of being conditioned that we are living in an open, connected world where we should be sharing our information, sharing about our lives, so that we are a happy, connected world. But then on the back of that, we are also being conditioned to basically buy more services digitally. And then for that to happen, a lot of basically the user-specific marketing happens, right? And this is where the data plays a huge role. And this is where I think data has become the biggest asset. It's not infrastructure anymore. It's not oil. It's not gold. It's not anything else. It's data at the moment, right? So this is where I think it's invaluable in that sense.
Yeah. Hey, to drill down a little bit more on this value question, I see a question come in from, or a remark come in from Koen from Great Lakes Coffee in Uganda. He says, indeed, I see that farmers are rarely given the chance to benefit from the data they avail. In Uganda, we currently address this by sharing printed copies of the data profile back to farmers. This can then be used to show their transactional value to financial institutions and support microcredit applications. Right?
That's
now,
right.
How much is that worth to them, or to a microcredit organization who needs to assess whether they can successfully lend out a microcredit to someone?
Yeah, it is. If I am allowed to answer that question, I don't have a, let's say, 100% watertight answer, but generally speaking, you know, when it comes to financial inclusiveness, access to finance, etc., there are companies who absolutely are willing to pay for their data because it's risk management. So basically, you provide profiling in order to de-risk their portfolio, and that represents a certain value. Secondly, it also represents value to farmers. We don't have that much experience in the eastern part of Africa, but for instance, in the western part of Africa, where interest rates are very high, also farmers can get rebates of a couple of percentage points on the interest once, you know, they would like to invest based on a solid business case, you know, which is based on the availability of data on farmer practices, income, basically, let's say, a tiny P&L of the farmer. So yes, there is absolutely a benefit. I would like just a couple of seconds, if you also allow me, Martin, when it comes to the value of data in general. You know, I don't have the idea that we're talking about tens or even hundreds of dollars per farmer per year, but you know, altogether, we can look first of all of internalization of cost, because that's part of the business case. Secondly, you know, the data can also be you know, used, and the value of data can also be used to improve farm services, digital interaction with farmers, all kind of other benefits. And thirdly, it will increase the transparency in the supply chain, which also represents a certain value in the end. Yeah, yeah.
Hey, I like that we've turned a problem into a discussion about value. Of course, not having access to that value is the problem. Before I switch to the solution side of this discussion, is there anyone who needs to or wants to add anything to this problem component of it?
Yeah. So
sorry, please.
Sorry, maybe a little, maybe kind of narrowing the focus a little bit. I think one of the pieces of one of the categories of agri-food and farmer data that is especially valuable right now is trustworthy data around sustainability, and that is, I think, where the greatest kind of mismatch also happens, because being able to prove that products have been produced in a sustainable way, has a lot of value, because it allows better margins. It allows companies to prove that they are working on their own sustainable development goals. But it is at the same time rather nebulous and hard to prove, because it has a lot of components around it. But I think that that category of data is especially one where the farmer on the ground may not be aware of how valuable the data is that he is actually sitting on top of.
Yeah, and that of course is the category of data that we at Fairfood deal with, right? We're trying to create value out of fairness, but we need the farmer, as in the farmer's data, to create that value, and therefore he has this claim on the value and needs to be able to protect that. Thanks for that, Jacob. Shiv, did you want to add something else, or shall I switch to the solution side?
No, one very small comment. Actually, Jacob actually kind of covered my point. But then I think the only one thing which we also should kind of reflect on is that how do we sensitize or inform the actual data owner with respect to this value that we are discussing, right? Because obviously we have established that the enterprises they understand, right, that data is gold. But how do we basically turn the tables and we basically inform the farmers and other data owners that this is the value, and they can actually they have this leverage, data as a leverage to kind of get better services.
Yeah. Well, the how do we do this side of it? Solutions. Let's talk options. What can we do? Jacob.
Yeah. Yes. All right. So I think there's a few ways to approach this. So let me just talk you along here. So the first way that we can say we want to put the farmer in the center is from an ethical standpoint. And I saw that there were a lot of NGOs also in the audience, so you will definitely be able to relate to this. And this is all related to creating trust around helping the farmer, by creating trusted brands, trusted trust marks. You see an example of this is things like fair trade logos, or Tony's Chocolonely for the Dutch people here who have created such a strong brand out of this ethical production that really nobody really needs to drill down into the data beneath, because they just trust that the trust mark is there.
Which is the evil of Google, right?
Yeah. But that kind of that is although it's very well intentioned, it does kind of put the farmer sort of out of the loop there, right? So you have to trust the person who is aggregating the data. Well, the next step is that you can say, okay, we want to incentivize the farmers, and then you go to the legal part. So from ethical, just having to trust that everybody does well. Legal, you go, no, we don't trust anymore. We put it into agreements. But really, then if the farmers want to become a party that can represent themselves in a legal context towards these really big processors that we have, and towards the retailers who may be even bigger, then you need to. You get that the farmers also need to increase in scale and join together in co-ops, and that's also what you see happening, of course. But then again, we have a lot of farmers that maybe are kind of missing the boat here, because they are not part of these bigger co-ops, and this whole drive towards bigger and bigger scale might also not actually be going towards more and more sustainability. So it is a solution, but it may not be pointing in the right direction. And then, so now we come to the third step, and that is we now have the technology in the form of decentralized tech, like self-sovereign identity systems like blockchain, where we can have the trust from the ethical step, but we can have the provability and the kind of the hard data from the legal step. But we joined that together in a system where you still can have really small players who are able to prove in a technical way that the data is correct, and that data can be followed throughout the whole supply chain up until the final point, and you can much easier make transparent who the data owners are and who gets what. And I won't go into the whole technical side of how self-sovereign identity works, but basically that is the holy grail of SSI, right? To make the individual sovereign over their own data. So kind of that feels like that we've come to the end of this development cycle, but then you must really also realize that with technology, that's not the be all and end all, because technology by itself is not going to be used just for good. So again, we then come back full circle that you need to look at the ethics again, but of the technology. And there it's really important to find to prevent like the unintended consequences. And we already know from a few examples that you gave that the unintended consequences of this data colonization for us are that Facebook and Google basically own all the data. But you have to really look at that if you want to do this for farmers and for sustainability data, that you really look at that beforehand, how you want to program ethics into the technology. The technology exists, we can use it, but we need to use it. Need to underpin it with the right legal parameters and the right ethics.
So it's sort of a decolonization by design or something.
yeah. In some sense, yes.
Is the idea of this SSI, self-sovereign identity, that I, Martin, or if I were a farmer, have one decentralized but one single source of me that is decentrally stored, and I control who gets access to it and under which conditions? Is that the idea?
Yeah, very good. So with self-sovereign identity, the idea is that instead of there being a central party who says who determines who you are and who also sees all the data coming through, you are in the center as the holder of the data. Anybody, it's a set of standards basically, and anybody following this set of standards can issue information to you, and you can then determine who you send it to. And those persons who you send it to, they can verify that the data is correctly issued, but without having any direct interaction with the issuers of that data. So you are all in control of who you share your data with.
Well, is that how Earth ID works, Shiv?
Yes, absolutely. I think Jakob has explained this really well, and I'm impressed with that answer, because it has kind of covered a lot of nuances. But what I want to also add to that is, I think when we look at our data, there are two aspects, right? Or two types of data. I would use a different category this time, not the previous one. So one type of data is which basically we ourselves are generating, right? A lot of social stuff for discussions, chats, and everything. Videos and all those things, but there's this data which is being issued to us by an organization, by a government body. So it could be our birth certificates, our driving licenses, our university credentials, our professional credentials, right? So in that sense, we have this concept of an issuer, and in certain cases, we are self-generating that data, right? But at the end of the day, there is one owner of all this data, right? In some cases, there's this discussion with respect to a debate with respect to data being co-owned in terms of, for example, when we talk about, let's say, agriculture space, the farmers are working with, let's say, processors, or they are working with certain other middlemen, and then together they are kind of generating some data. So there's this question of that there being more than one owner. But when we talk about SSI as a concept, self-sovereign identity, it's about that the owner of the data should have complete control with respect to how they manage and how they share that data with whom and how, right? And this is where what the central concept is, that the data that is being issued or generated, I think that is carried into a decentralized wallet or a decentralized repository, which in the sense that it's like for every user you have a specific or an independent space which is not shared with anybody else, right? So for example, we carry our wallets where we have our cards, where we have our money, and every individual carry their own wallets, right? So we have kind of digitized that concept where you have a mobile wallet or you can have a web wallet also, but then all the data that you are kind of generating, but let's for this particular discussion, let's focus on the identity side of things. So all the identities that are being issued to you, starting from the birth, your birth certificates, your educational credentials, your professional credentials, your passports, your driving license, they can be directly issued by the issuer to your wallet. And then what it means is that, first of all, your identities are being digitized, and secondly, they are kind of broken down into specific aspects or attributes, right? Because I think if you look at an identity card, you have your name, your address, your date of birth, and so many things. So they also get, so one thing is a credential with respect to which allows you to do certain things. For example, a driving license lets me drive a car, right? So one thing is whether I can do a particular activity. So in terms of a claim that yes, I can drive a car or I can teach a class, right? So that becomes a claim. But then there are certain attributes about an individual with respect to my name, my age, my weight, my nationality, all those things. So they become my attributes, right? Now, what SSI allows you to do is, like, in certain cases, you can present a claim. For example, I can go to an employer and I can say, yes, I am a BTech and I can basically code for you. So I can present a claim to them, and then they would be able to verify, because there's this proof that has been created, which is not reliant on a physical copy of information, right? And this is where I can present a claim, and that the verifier of the claim or the service provider or the organization on the end, they can verify that this claim is valid or not. Yeah. And also in certain cases, I can share certain attributes about myself, right? I can prove that I am an adult. For example, if I'm going to buy a bottle of beer, I can prove that I am an adult without showing my ID card, right? Or I can basically prove that I live in UK without basically sharing my passport. So in that sense, it basically gives you complete control in terms of what you want to share about yourself or prove about yourself without even sharing any information, right? And also, so basically the key concept is like SSI empowers users with data ownership, privacy, and consent.
Yeah, and I believe you have worked in the shrimp business with Earth ID. Could you give an example like that?
Yes, absolutely. So we are working with one startup which is bringing technology to the aquaculture sector, and they are working with Indian shrimp farmers. And then the concept is, obviously, for one thing is about having that supply chain traceability, right? But also they are using Earth ID for issuing an SSI to the farmers, because if you think about this, some of the challenges that we look at the agriculture industry is that it's not very, I think, tech savvy as of today, right? In terms of the digital technology, not the other technologies, but digital technology. And this is where I think there are a lot of global value that is not very accessible. So they don't have borderless access to a lot of technologies, right? And this is where, if we are trying to, if we can provide that SSI, they can get access to global services in a borderless manner. And also, one of the things that a lot of farmers, and I think I have seen this personally in India also, that a lot of farmers commit suicide because they don't get access to credit. They are not able to basically get certain benefits from the government, right? And this is where, if they have an identity and if they are able to prove certain things about themselves, and also it's about let's say most of the banks, they rely on a credit score, right? But then if we can kind of create an alternative credit score for them, so that now they have proven something about themselves which they can take to banks or other financial institutions to get access to credit. So in that sense, their lives then suddenly changes, and we drive social and financial inclusion. So in that sense, SSI can do two things. One is basically obviously enable these social and financial inclusion, but secondly, when we look at the supply chain, even for an agriculture sector, there are a lot of actors that are involved in end-to-end processing of goods, right? So in that sense, if you are able to connect the the identity in a privacy preserving model, you would be able to basically kind of prove that how the processes were followed, how the regulations were followed.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times the farmers, the produce that they generate, they get rejected in international or global market because of a lot of quality issues or regulation issues,
Yeah.
right? But if you are able to prove end to end that, okay, as an organization you have done certain things, but as individuals also who were participating in that processing of the goods or the farm goods, then it basically it democratizes the agriculture space.
Yeah. Hey Han, ethical solutions, just don't do it. Legal solutions, just if you do it, I'll sue you. Or technical solutions, I just make it impossible for you to do it. In the line of work that you do, are these solutions usable? What?
Oh, definitely. But I would also like to be, let's say, the fly on the wall a little bit now. You know, tech solutions are available. I'm very happy that we're having this conversation. But Google at agri-tech landscape or that kind of things, and you will see thousands and thousands of agri-tech startups. As a matter of fact, we as an NGO, you know, tech companies are knocking at our door every day to sell their solutions. So it's not the technology on its own. I mean, the technology is more or less available. The challenge is how are we going, you know, to implement this in the field in such a way that it becomes scalable and self-sustainable in the economical sense. So we need to think about business models, or at least models to make this self-sustainable at farmer level. That's one thing. But we're also talking about data, for instance, for sustainability claims by the industry, etc. So there must also be a very clear business case for the industry, for the food supply chains, etc., etc. So we need to look at delivery mechanism. Now, what I also see a bit is like there are tech companies who are providing, you know, part of the solution, like blockchain traceability combined with farmer services, etc., etc. And you know, every solution trying to solve the whole supply chain or solve the issues in the supply chain might be dangerous. So I am absolutely in favor of looking at delivery mechanism. What will be the delivery mechanism for farmers? How can we reach farmers? I mean, we have to be realistic as well. Of course, the mobile uptake is growing rapidly, but in practice, you know, in major parts of Africa, we're still working with IVR or SMS services because smartphones are not that highly penetrated. 3G, 4G, 5G networks, and of course that will come, but then we have the issue of literacy. Also, you know, very practical things. We have done a couple of experiments with farmers to test user interfacing, so the UX, the user experience. And you have to, you know, to take into consideration that those are not the most advanced smartphones, so the touchscreens are not that best, and you know, humidity might be high. Farmers are working with their, you know, with their fingers in the earth whole day. So imagine what happens if they have to do all these things on a very small, you know, mobile device. So there are a lot of things which needs to be tested. So looking at the delivery mechanism at farmer level, there must be, you know, plenty of pilots and experiments because there is no single truth. And when it comes to business cases and the delivery mechanism to the industry, we also need to dig into it. And then the third part is the consumer, how to increase consumer awareness, etc., etc. And of course, with traceability and QR codes, we can already start to do a lot of storytelling at consumer level. But you know, all those let's say markets, consumers, businesses, and farmers need also, you know, to be prepared and get ready for those next steps. Yeah. And then you know, to finalize this issue, what in the end will be the valuation mechanism? Because also we're saying the value must return to farmers. Whenever it's, you know, a couple of percentage points rebate on a loan, then the business case for a farmer is clear. Access to other services is also clear. But, you know, how are we going to reward those farmers? So they must be incentivized, etc., etc. So also there, you know, creating traction in those local communities, etc. A lot of work needs to be done, and it can only be done, you know, once the different stakeholders and the different players in the supply chain, supported by tech providers, will start working together with the willingness also to experiment and to pilot.
Yeah, Jacob?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and I think this is hitting the nail on the head, that you want to have those incentives in place, and the incentives for the big companies are often quite clear. And that is, I saw in the chat also somebody saying you cannot use a technical tool to solve deep-rooted inequalities. I fully agree, because you can maybe say, yeah, we'll solve the connectivity problem by providing these farms with satellite uplinked sensors for in their fields, etc. But then there's no way. In most situations, then that data will not be going through the farmer, but going directly to whoever is paying for those satellite uplinks, right? And if you really want to incentivize everybody to put in the data, then you don't have just a data stream going up the supply chain, but you also have a financial stream going the other way. So that you are rewarded for providing this data by things like lower premiums on loans and on financing, as was already mentioned, direct benefits of the sales, etc. But yeah, I totally agree that the incentives for all the parties in the chain need to be positive. Otherwise, it breaks down.
Right, and I think what I would say, I think my thought process is that I think it's a process, right? So for the process starts with education and awareness with respect to, I think, making everybody understand the value of data and then how it can provide benefits. Then second point is basically enabling, using technology as an enabler, right? And then lastly, it's about driving adoption with incentivization. And when we look at Earth ID, right? So Earth ID is kind of it's a horizontal solution. It's not necessarily specific for one vertical. But when we even look at agriculture as a vertical, right? What we feel as a benefit is that once the farmer and the other stakeholders, once they have control on their own data, that is when they would get benefits like access to services, right? Because I think let me quote the example of Aadhaar here. So before Aadhaar, so obviously most of the people in India they live under poverty, right? So we know that and then also people don't get access to a lot of benefits the government provides or the public sector provides. And this is where the purpose of having that Aadhaar program was to basically create a digital identity, which then basically brings people into the system so that they can get a bank account, they can get a basic insurance. And then on back of that, there was this new industry, which is micro lending. Right now, these people who have a digital identity with a bank account with basic insurance, now they can basically borrow small amounts like $100, $200, and they can basically go about their lives, or maybe invest that money into their farms or into the education of the children, right? So this kind of drives social and financial inclusion. So in that sense, digital identity kind of enables social and financial inclusion. But the question again is that if you have a digital identity which is centralized, it gives the control to somebody else. Now with SSI, you get a digital identity, but you also get the control. And then what this means is that once I know a lot of information, if I control a lot of information which I'm generating, then I get basically access to services. I get access to credit, and I get that leverage which I can use to basically bargain with my other stakeholders, right? So in that sense, it can work in the favor of the farmers, but obviously it's a cycle. It's a process that we have to go through the motions first.
Yeah. Hey guys, let's switch gears a little bit. I think we've already almost approached the end of this webinar, and we have a last section to cover. So I'm going to ask my colleague Rafael to swoop in the second poll, which is a very simple one, asking a simple question: whether, Raf, do you believe that data colonization can be prevented? And of course, it leads into other questions. Oh, yes, no, yes, yes. 66%, 75%, 80%, yes. Wow. We're going down, guys. Oh, no. We lost it. Oh no! Oh, it's not gonna work. 53. Go on, keep going. Oh, we're losing the battle for the data colonization. This is interesting.
Well, we're not losing, but it's just an indication when it comes to the complexity of the issue. I also saw a couple of comments, related to legislation. Things could be pushed and forced by law, which is absolutely true. And as a matter of fact, I do expect, more regulation, at least in Western Europe in the upcoming years, also forcing companies to, to provide all kind of data, etc. To prove, their sustainability practice in the supply chain. But again, that is, in my opinion, a trigger to start organizing, this now. And we need the industry, we need tech partners, we need NGOs, we need retail chains. So altogether, it is a huge challenge, but I'm positive that at least in the basic approach, we can do something.
So it's 50-50. How's that for progress?
That's a good start.
Hey, I think this resonates some of the questions that we see in the chat. For instance, Marta asks, can we expect either farmers to use the leverage they have on data, or company service providers to take their responsibility? Whose problem or solution is this? Is there also a role for government or legislation? And now, Raf, give us the last poll, please. Because it asks who holds the key. There you go. Who holds the key to the solution, if there is one? Is it farmers themselves? Should they not wait for us to fix it, do it themselves? Is it the processors or the suppliers, retailers, regulators? Civil society? I thought about putting consumers here, but I decided not to, because they supposedly influence everyone. Is it big tech? This is leaning more clearly. So it's clearly not the retailers. That much we know. Because then it's probably not going to be solved, maybe. So if there's a solution, who holds the key? Currently, we say regulators. So it harks back, Jacob, to the legal solution. Civil society, that's us, right? Han, Fairfood, that's Earth ID in a way. Processors 15%, farmers 15%, retailers no. Regulators 40 and civil society 30. This seems strangely skewed, but
I think it's very fair to say that the regulators have a really important place here, and maybe not to solve the entire problem, because of course they can't, but they can make the rules in such a way that you exclude the ways that you don't want to see this happen. So I think actually something like the GDPR in Europe is one of the most powerful sources of innovation that we've seen in the past decade, because it really forces everybody suddenly to think about data ownership, because you have these massive fines if you are not privacy aware. And of course that applies to Europe, but you see actually a lot of countries that apply the GDPR, because it is such a strong regulation, even outside of Europe, in their contracts, and that is so we can actually have good regulations as a good export product, even from Europe.
Regulation as a technology or an innovation, as a product.
Yeah, no, that regulation definitely plays a role. I think it could be also the, let's say, the enabling role to start the process or to accelerate the process. Nevertheless, as said, there must be business cases in the end, because otherwise the models will never become self-sustainable. Next to that, GDPR still doesn't prevent, Facebook and Google making tons of money out of our data. So I would like to at least to challenge also the audience to think beyond that, and also when it comes to the scalability, take a regulation. There will be new laws in due time, as an example. Now, all of a sudden, companies will start collecting specifically the data they need. So that could be, going 3, 4, 5 companies or NGOs or representatives of companies or audit companies will go to the farmer to collect bits and pieces of data, which will be very fragmented. When I go into the field, I already hear a lot of farmers complaining that, you are the 5th NGO this week asking me about data collection, etc. So I don't have the solution yet, but, let's think of solutions where, the combination of all the required data in the end will be in the benefit of the farmer, because I think, imagine those Facebook profile, you have 5,000 data points from a farmer altogether. That represents more value for the farmer, increases his bargaining power than once it remains so fragmented as it is per today.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a big issue. It's a big, hairy issue, guys. We stumbled upon it. Huh? We thought, well, let's follow a coconut. And then it turned out that this coconut goes from hand to hand, and the hand belongs to someone, and that person has rights and things to gain from this story that is sold in the supermarket at markup value. So this put us, I think, and a similar stumble upon is what you guys and many of the people in the chat experienced as well. Everything comes down to identity, to people, and data about these people is really, really important and crucial to protect. I have not much more to add, but let's make a quick last round, guys. Last 2 cents.
Yeah, so I would really like to agree with you that identity is the key. If you want to do anything, then you need to be able to identify the people and the companies that you want to incentivize, that you want to pay, and that you want to give the data to. And I think Shiv with My Earth is really going the right way with that. You have other initiatives like Blue Number. You have a lot of local initiatives as well, of course, country initiatives. But I think it starts with being able to point your digital finger at somebody, and then you can decide what role everybody needs to play and where the incentives need to go.
Yeah, Shiv, last 2 cents.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think see, we kind of agree that so we are providing a solution which can kind of potentially solve some of the problems, but I think it boils down to people like us, farmers, and other we play our different roles in the society, right? For us to adopt these solutions, right? Because I think if you imagine this, that Facebook has more than 1 billion users. I think it might be 2 billion users around the world, right? And so if 2 billion people can use Facebook and share their data with Facebook, why don't people like us use solutions which are trying to help them gain the control back, and then also monetize and leverage that as basically as a bargaining tool, right? I think this is where I think there's a lot of responsibility that lies on the people as well.
Yeah. Fair data.
Yeah, that's what we call. We have indeed a project which we call internally Fair Data, which has, by the way, nothing to do with the findable, accessible, etc. interpretation. It's just leveraging on fair trade. So it's a working title. It's not final. But yeah, I see also in the chat comments on code of conduct, which are already available, which is absolutely true. But in the end, you know, how does a farmer benefit from it? So again, tech is not the issue. I think there are plenty of tech solutions available. The issue is, how are we going to engage with farmers in such a way that it is organized for them, or they organize themselves, which is even better. And yes, there are all kind of mechanisms. One of the things in this whole fair data discussion we've raised is, you know, data cooperative, that kind of models. So I don't have the solution, but I would like to keep looking at this from a farmer's perspective, together with the farmers we work with, and you know, work together on models which in the end are scalable and self-sustainable.
Yeah. Hey, on that note, guys, and everybody in this room, thank you very much for I think what was a lively discussion. We will answer all the questions that are posed in the chat. We didn't get to ask or answer them all. We will though. On that note, I think I'll colonize me some sheep and some wood and some stone at the detriment of my friends tonight. I hope you'll all have a pleasant evening and a great end of the remarkable year. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thanks to all who joined.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.